I think I first came to know composition through literature. You know, when you read something that's very elegantly written with the right words and there's a free kind of poetry to it, it just seems beautiful. This is a story about f-stop and an embarrassing situation, or just an unusual situation I got myself in a photography class not of my own making. And then at the end of the story, I'm going to talk about how to take pictures out of high-speed vehicles. This is a chopper that's going to take us up for a little photography shot here in Botswana. And I'll talk about how you take photos from things like this, or planes, or trains, or automobiles. I've been doing a lot of that this trip, so I'll kind of give some practical advice that is, you know, loosely affiliated with this f-stop story. So this must have been about maybe 5 years ago, and I had been invited to go speak at this photography class. This was when I was in Austin, Texas, and it was a small class, you know, maybe 30 or 40 people in it. And so I got up there, and you know, you kind of fumble around like you do with your projector, get it all plugged in, and finally get the thing running. And I start showing the slideshow of some of my favorite work, and I'm kind of loosely talking about it, about why I took the photo, or the artistic reasons behind it, or you know, so on and so forth. I'm not being very technical at all, just sort of talking about why I thought the photo was interesting. And then this woman in the front row, she raised her hand when I put up this photo of the fireworks. I took this photo of fireworks exploding in Austin, and it's actually the one that won that competition and hung in the Smithsonian for a year after I won. It's kind of a famous photo. And so I put it up, and I talked about it, and this girl, she raised her hand, and she goes, "What f-stop did you take that at?" And I kind of shut down for quite a while, and I kind of saw my whole, you know, photographic life, as, you know, as brief as it was, kind of flash in front of my eyes. And really, I had no idea what f-stop I took it at. And then when she asked the question, it made me think, oh, this is a very important question she's asking. I should know the answer to this. As if, you know, this is actually what people were learning in photography school. And then I compared that to how I learned, and of course I'm totally self-taught. And by that point, I did, you know what f-stop was, although I always considered these things to be in fluid motion, you know, f-stop and ISO and shutter speed, as I just saw them as just sort of this amorphous blob that I would move around. And so I thought, like, okay, what answer should I give her, you know? Because I was sitting there thinking, okay, I could sit here and say, I shot this at f4. And the entire class of this photography neophytes, they would just nod their head, go, yeah, that sounds right, f4. That's the right f-stop. Or I could have sat there and said, I shot this at f18. They would have said, yeah, that's right, okay, f18. And they would just make a mental note, you know, like, next time I shoot fireworks, shoot f18. But really, it doesn't even matter. And I think there's something maybe a bit backwards in the way that some people learn photography, in that there's an overemphasis on the tech side of it. And really, I'm here to tell you that you don't actually have to know to use your camera. You don't have to know everything about your camera in order to take an interesting picture. Okay, there's a big difference between this and other things that might be in your life. Like, let's say you're a brain surgeon or an accountant. Well then, yes, you do need to get training, and you need to learn how to get from point A to point B to point C, and have some sort of a curriculum so that you are then qualified to, you know, do brain surgery on a person. But when you're in the arts world, that's not necessarily true. You can create very interesting artistic works before you fully know how to use all of your tools. So don't let the lack of mastery of your tools and complete and total knowledge of every possible system be a hindrance for you actually creating art. For me, what I would do is I would look at this, it was my old Nikon at the time, but I would look down, I would see these numbers kind of floating around, f8, f7, I would see ISO, I would see the shutter speed, and it was all a little confusing for me in the beginning, but I would just try different things. It's much better to not know the f-stop and just guess at an f-stop and see if there's a difference. In fact, for a lot of landscape scenarios, you might take a shot at f4, f8, f17. It would look the exact same. So I think it's okay to be confused in those situations. But in other situations, you might see that there's a bit of a difference. So if you kind of just learn from experience and try different things, remember it's all digital. You're free to make a lot of different mistakes and to see what the difference is between different ISOs. Don't worry about memorizing some kind of a huge, heuristic chart beforehand, all right? So that's the big difference. When it comes to the artistic type of things, just let loose and be free and continue to make art as you're learning the tools. Let's start this studio session by showing you a few of these f-stop type oriented photos, okay? And I'll just talk about it. Now, here's one that I took from a helicopter. This was not in Africa, mind you. This was in Chicago. It's a number of years ago. I was actually hanging out of a helicopter that a very nice fan rented for me. By the way, this fan has now been upgraded to a full friend. And anyway, it was great. I love this city, and it was so fun to go take photos from the air. And if you want to see my settings for this, let me show you. If I press Command I here in iPhoto, it kind of shows up all the settings over here. But I took this back when I used my Nikon D3X back in the olden days. I shot it with the 14 to 24 millimeter lens. This is at ISO 800, f2.8, 1/1000th of a second. Okay, so that was plenty fast enough to freeze the action. One reason I did f2.8 is because these low numbers let in a lot of light. And typically, when you shoot from the air, you want as much light in as possible. So just get that lens down as low as you can get it. That's what I did here. All right, let's look at a few other ones now. The rest of these are from Africa. This is this unbelievable bird. I think it's called a nest weaver or social weaver. I'm not so up on my bird names. But this is a nest they would all share. It's a tremendously awesome nest. These guys were fast. I mean fast. So for this particular one, I figured out these guys were so fast that I wanted to make a very fast shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second. Okay, you can see my f-stop here was f5. That's actually a mistake. I should have had it all the way down at f4, just to let as much light in as possible. There was really nothing that this bought me. I think I was just in a bit of a hurry to get this guy. And since I was letting my ISO float on my camera, which means I let the computer figure out the ISO, it chose ISO 3200, which is a pretty high number. It can be quite grainy, but it's not so bad on a full frame camera. So let me ask you a question. If I had chosen f4 here instead of f5, do you think that the ISO would be higher or lower? Well, it's good to guess, but I'll go ahead and tell you the answer. The answer is it would be lower, because when you don't have enough light coming in, which means your number's too high over here, then it has to increase the ISO. And the ISO basically is just sort of guessing at the light. That's why you see noise. All those little noisy things are just misguessed light. All right, let's move on here. Here's another one taken from the air. Okay, we were in kind of a slow-moving plane over this canyon. This is in Fish River in Namibia. And I set my shutter speed to 1/1250th of a second. Okay, and that seemed to be more than fast enough. Kept my aperture nice and low at f4, ISO 100, which is fine because it was the middle of the day. For this one, I love this structure in the middle of the desert. Namibia is a wonderful place to fly across. I basically kept the same settings for the entire flight. This was about half an hour later. So pretty much the exact same settings, or actually exactly the same settings. Here, the f-stop was f4, okay? But you're saying, what in the squirrel, Trey? Everything is in focus. Well, that's right. It's because I was so wide. I was actually at 24 millimeter. And if you are going to use a low f-stop, and you have a wide angle like this, pretty much everything beyond, let's say 20 feet will be in focus, okay? Now there's these charts and stuff you can look at, but just a general rule of thumb, if you're using a wide angle lens, like I was here, pretty wide, 24, you can get that f-stop nice and low and everything will still be in focus. All right, yeah. All right, that's that one. Next, this was a fast one. This is 1/1600th of a second at f4. I zoomed in quite far at 200 millimeter, and this is ISO 320. So one thing you might notice, beyond the effects, see the swirly effects out here? That's because I use this program called Analog FX Pro for the processing. But you can see that behind this guy, this is called a red lechwe, by the way, which is another animal I've never heard of. But anyway, that's what it's called. And you can see that we're kind of out of focus behind it, and we're out of focus in front of it, even though we're at f4, pretty much the same as the last shot, right? But the big difference here is that we're zoomed in at 200 millimeter. So as you zoom in, you're going to start to see more out of focus behind, out of focus before if you use these low f numbers. Okay. Here's a fast bird in flight. I was actually quite lucky to get it. You can see how fast I had to make my shutter speed, 1/6400th of a second at f4. But you can see that nice bokeh behind. There's another one. This is called an LBR, a lilac-breasted roller. This one, it was quite dark. Okay, so I kept and he was pretty still, so I kept my shutter speed slower, 1/30th of a second. My f-stop was f1 or f4.5 and ISO 100. Here's one of these Cape buffaloes. Everyone's scared of these there, by the way. They say this is the scariest animal out there, and I believe them. Here I was quite low, but I wanted to be fast enough to make sure I got the birds moving, because he was moving, of course, much slower than the birds. And it seemed like 1/1600th of a second was fast enough. And I'm quite zoomed in here because you can see it's out of focus behind him again, like that red lechwe. And a lower ISO here, so I didn't have as many noise problems. This is taken pretty much in the middle of the night. This is one of these amazing animals. It's called a serval, another animal I never heard of. But it's like the tallest cat there is, and they're super rare. So I really felt lucky to see it. This was at night, 200 millimeter, f4. Got that f-stop as low as I could for these night shots. 1/200th of a second to make sure I let enough light in. And then ISO 800, which is not too terribly high. Here's another one from that helicopter. Right after you saw me talk in that little intro bit, I jumped on the chopper and got this shot, a little baby following her mom. This is 1/2000th of a second. I pretty much had the camera in manual mode the whole time, okay, while I was in the air, because I wanted to make sure I got this speed, all right? F-stop at f4.5, and ISO I let float, but it chose 3200. And the reason I let it float is sometimes I would shoot into the sun, sometimes I would shoot into the shadow, and I would let it make those decisions rather than me always changing the ISO on the fly, okay? Here's another bird coming in for a landing. This is nice and fast. You can see we're still at f4. Again, if you're just getting started with f-stops, that's why you see this nice out of focus area in the back, and you can see this whole tree and the bird are in focus, but the branch here is just getting out of focus as it gets closer to the viewer. Okay. Here's another shot. I was down low in the water actually by these Cape buffalo. Those guys are some mean mamma jammas, really mean. But you can see how some of the wheat that I shot through here is out of focus, just like the close and the distance. This is all at f4 at 200 millimeter. Okay. Here's a cool photo. I quite like this one. This is at f4.5, 1/1600th, although I could have made it a little slower because they weren't moving that fast, and ISO 160. And I cropped in quite close on this, even though it was 200 millimeter. Okay. And last, I'll show you a few helicopter shots. Here's kind of Bell shooting right out the side. You can see this is shot at f4, 1/1500th of a second, ISO 1600. But you can see that everything is nice and out of focus way behind her. Okay, that's just sort of an automatic effect. Now here's another shot that I shot behind her, and you can see that I focused on her. I'm pretty wide here. Okay, in this case I'm 24 millimeter, just as wide as that elephant shot, but you can see how she is in focus, but everything else is out of focus. That's because she's inside that 20-foot radius that I talked about. All right, that's the only time you're gonna get this depth of field kind of effect. So the photo that I want to work on with you right now is one that I took as she was shooting this video. I had to lean out of the helicopter even further to get around her, and I ended up getting this shot for myself. So you're probably wondering, well, how did you do that, Trey? Let me show you. Let's go over to Lightroom. Sweet lady Lightroom in the house. Now here is the shot, but let's just kind of back up and show you what happened here, okay? If I click the crop tool, you can see my original crop. I was all over the place. You can see I was totally tilted, I was too wide. It was kind of a mess, okay? And I basically got in on the action. Let's get in a little bit more, because you see we have these lines of phi here. And if you forget how to do those lines of phi, when you have the crop tool active, you can see it's up here under Tools, Crop Guide Overlay, Golden Ratio, okay? And if you have a big nice object like this sun here, you can put the crisscross right there and you're good to go, okay? Yeah, so I think this is a good crop. Then I'll press enter. Now, what we have here is the contrast moving up. You can see how the contrast just makes it kind of more inky. It really gives those colors a bit of flavor, I think. Highlights, we're going to bring those down a little bit. You can see what happens with the sky. Let's put the highlights and whites back down to normal. See, the sky there is all right, but as I slide both of them back up, you see it look very nice up there. Down below we have the shadows. We're going to increase those a little bit to make sure those colors have a bit of green in them. Pull up the blacks down here. I don't know if clarity will do anything. I think we don't want to do much clarity here because we want to keep it nice and soft. Okay, nice and soft. In fact, let's soften up the bottom even more. And we're going to pick this gradient tool, the graduated filter, pull up from the bottom. Let's bring this back to normal. Just double click exposure to bring it back to normal. And let's decrease the clarity to make it even like smoother and softer down there. Cool. Saturation, no, we don't want to do that. I take that back. Okay, good, close. Let's scroll down to see if there's anything else that we've done to this. I don't think so. Maybe a tiny bit of noise reduction to scale back a little to that ISO 640 action. Yeah, we're looking all right. Let's see what happens with the vignetting here. No, it is a look that we could go for, but I don't think we will here. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to right click and edit this in Photoshop. Now, by the way, before I do this, let me just back up, sports fans, because I know that a lot of people watching are just Lightroom people, and that's perfectly fine. As you can see, the shot is fine as it is now. Nothing else really needs to be done to it. But I'm going to go add just a few extra things in Photoshop, okay, because I feel like it. So I'm going to go edit in Adobe Photoshop. Now let's work on this photo. Let's make it even more awesome. Let's pull this over. Let's give ourselves a bit of working room. So as I go through these different Fs, remember F cycles through all three states here. Let me give you a color tip. When you're in this mode, okay, you can go right click over here. Let's say medium gray, okay? Medium gray is actually a much better thing to work in because I was talking to my friend Stu Maschwitz, who works at Industrial Light and Magic. He worked on the Star Wars movies even. I was talking to him about printing and color and this sort of thing. And I said, well, you know, it looks different on every monitor. How do you know what's going on? He goes, look, Trey, just set your background to medium gray and your eyes will adjust. Okay, this, if it looks good on your computer on medium gray, then it will look good on almost every other computer and almost every print. So I figured if it's good enough for him and ILM, it's good enough for me. Thanks for that hot tip there, Stu. Now let's amp it up. I want to do a little something to the sky here. Okay, it's nice and soft, but I want to give it a bit more texture up there. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to use a plugin. Okay, I have reviews of all the plugins I use on stuckincustoms.com, but I'm going to use this new one I'm quite enamored with called MacFun. Okay, so I click MacFun, Intensify Pro. MacFun is spelled with a P-H-U-N. That means it's just kind of quirky and fun, and I'm talking P-H-U-N. I can see their marketing department now. Like, oh, we like the word fun, but can we change the spelling? Okay, so let's get serious here. Now, when you click on these different ones, these are some of my favorites that I've selected over here. These are little presets. You can see it's already amping up the sky a little bit. If I go here to the default, you can see everything. There's all kinds of funky funk in here, not the black and white ones. But you can do all kinds of different things here. Just click on them and get ideas. It's just a nice idea to get nice way to get different ideas. Let me go here to favorites, and I did like this mid-tone structure. I thought that looked kind of nice, doesn't it? Yeah. So then we can go here and adjust and do a few more adjustments even. Okay, Just play with the contrast and see what it looks like in these different tones. It's kind of nice. And right now I'm just looking at the sky, okay, because we're just going to do this bit to the sky. And that's the thing about Photoshop, because it allows us to run a filter like this on just part of the photo. Okay, I'll say that again because that's very important to my method of doing photos. All right, so that looks pretty good, so I will say apply. Okay, now a lot of these presets are available just for Lightroom, and I do recommend them just for Lightroom. That's just great if you want to do it like that. But typically what I like to do is make my photos quite unique and take these filters and only apply them to part of the photo. Okay, so let me take the original one, which is on the bottom, move it back to the top. All right, now if I hide and show it, you can see the difference that it's made to the sky. Isn't the sky just so much more interesting after we Mac Fun-ized it? I think so. But look at the, now look at the water. Okay, so when you look at the water back and forth, I like the softer water. Now put your eyes back to the sky. I like the more textured sky. Okay, and you just can't really do that if you're in Lightroom. You can only do one or the other. All right, so here we're going to make a layer mask. We're going to pick our brush, and we're going to go pretty heavy here, 90%, and just start brushing through to get that nice textury sky. Oh yeah, now we're talking. Okay, now we're going to combine them into one. We have a few spots here. I don't know if you can see or not, but this little spotty spot here. So let's pop that guy. We're going to press J. That's sort of the content aware spot healing brush tool. Bam, those are gone. Looks like some birds here or something. You know, it's like dirt on my lens, but I'm going to get rid of the birds. Awesome. All right, I'm going to show you one super level double bonus Trey trick that I often do in these sun type shots and to water and reflections. That's going to make it even more romantic. It's already romantic enough, but what can I say? I'm a helpless romantic. So we're going to really amp it up here. This is an advanced maneuver, okay? Do not let it intimidate you. So I'll go semi-slowly. I'm going to make 2 duplicates of this layer, okay? Watch this. Doop, doop. All right. Now, what am I going to do now? I'm going to hide this layer. Okay, I'm going to go to the middle layer, and I'm going to blur it. Okay, I'm going to blur it to Kingdom Come. We'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Okay, not really to Kingdom Come. That was being a bit dramatic there. I think I'm just going to blur it to 14.8, which is halfway to Kingdom Come, as everyone knows. So I hit OK. Now you see it's all blurry blur. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to change this mode to Overlay. Okay, look at that. Whoa. Okay, now it's blurry, yes, but it's giving it some sort of a glow. And again, we're not going to glow the whole thing, but I think it's too saturated, don't you? So we're going to dial back the saturation. The way we do that is we're going to pull up our hue saturation delimiter bopper. I have the hotkey, but I'll show you the long way to do it. You go to Filter, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. All right, and we're going to bring down the saturation of this layer. You can see as I move this around, it's just changing the whole shoot and match. Okay, we're just going to move it down a little bit, like that. We're going to put the original back on top. Bam. Okay, we're going to make a layer mask up here. Now basically, wherever I brush through, I'm going to get that smoothie smooth water. Okay, watch this. Brush through, get that nice water. Okay, let me look at a before and after of the smooth water. Before, after, before, after. Just the smooth, glowy water is really nice, isn't it? We'll do a little bit more around the sun too. The sun, make it a little bit more glowy up here, a little softer in the sky. Not too much, just a little bit. There we go. Very good. So now when I hide this middle layer and show it, you can see the effect that this glow has done to it. Okay, it's just going to give it this warm, otherworldly glow, which I quite like. Very cool. Okay, let's look at it before and after. Let's zoom in here. And let's go over to Lightroom. Let me click on the original. Let's just go ahead and reset this thing. Look at that thing. It's all sideways. It's a mess. It's all right. Okay. So we started with this. Moving from a helicopter, high-speed shot, a lot of stress in the middle of a beautiful sunset. And of course, the sunset was beautiful. It was stress-free. So we get to recreate our reality, and we ended up with this. Okay, well, thank you for joining me for this episode, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. You take a certain kind of photo or process it a certain way, and suddenly you have a new perspective on everything, and it kind of gives you like this invisible layer into the world.